In conversations about well-being, in addition to having a sense of purpose and a sense of belonging, gratitude is one of the great drivers of well-being. And we're all wise to remember where that comes from and how do we allow gratitude to well up in us. And I want to talk a little bit about something that I noticed happening out of the design of this, which is the vulnerability that people said they were able to bring forward, that there was room, that there was a space to speak. And one of the reasons that there was room to speak is that there was a choice to create safety in this room. Not through ground rules and typical structures and what said in the room stays in the room or some Chatham House rules or anything like that, but actually through a modeling of safety that said, not only is it okay to speak from your heart about your wound, your hurt, your joy, but that it's invited and that this is a place for that. And that much of our job in our communities, in our organizations, with our lovers, whoever it might be, is how do we create the kind of safety that allows those that we are with to come forward for who they are. And in that moment when someone is, or a community is wanting to express itself, or someone whose voice has been shut down is wanting to speak, is how do we create that sense of safety as a fundamental competence of building partnership, of building collaboration, of building a relationship of meaning. And certainly, if we're going to create some kind of a network that could have some significant impact, it would be rooted in that same fundamental principle of we know how to create safety that allows for vulnerability and truth, for something magical to happen. And that we recognize that moment when our job is to create safety. And that we also recognize the moment that when safety is created, that we know that we can step forward into it and we have the courage to do that. So I want to just name those as almost design principles of what I experienced happening that might inform us as we think about how do we go to scale and spread and collective impact, and part of those things that I know tomorrow is oriented towards. And the humility that it takes to consent to that, to not knowing, to not know long enough for something beautiful to happen. A very dear friend of mine is an artist, and I often think about not knowing when I think of this person who's an abstract painter. And I remember walking into her studio one day, and there's this incredible explosion, riot of color and shape and abstract beauty and all of that. And the question was, so Tyler, what do you think? And I really didn't know what to say. I was sort of overwhelmed. And it was beautiful, but my breath was sort of taken away. And all I could come up with in the question was, where did you start that? And her response is, well, I had to not know what I was going to do so that something fresh could happen. That the beauty of her art came from not knowing. That the competence was to be able to trust the power of the open palette to create a piece of art that had not been created before. And that unless that kind of humility and courage to face the unknown, then we can't lean in some way to something special and magical that allows us to go to the next level. We're just doing the same stuff, same kind of thing that the theater played out. I want to talk about these terms. Maybe we could, this part might have interaction if you want to play with me a little bit on this. Resilience. And there was a lot of good things said about resilience today, so sorry I had to find the definition. Maybe others of you know. The ability to spring back is what the Wikipedia said about that, right? Elasticity, to recover quickly. Ma'am, I'm wanting to remember your name? Jamila. Jamila. I think you said something like, but when maybe you're empty, or did you say this? I was on the other side of the room. Tell me your name then. Denise. What exactly did you say about when we're empty? How does one bounce forward, right? That sense of springing forward when there's not sort of some kind of an artesian flow. So without job, without meaning, without purpose, without a sense of who my people are, without a sense of that, how do I find that place? Easy to say, oh, be resilient, right? So that was resilience, and then it got me thinking about consilience. How many are familiar with the term? E.O. Wilson wrote a book on consilience, which is sort of rooted in the same thing. And I look at what E.O. Wilson was talking about. He said it's a concordance of evidence, a unity of knowledge. And this definition really helped me, where independent sources of information converge around a strong conclusion. So that from multiple sources, multiple places that the information could come from, it lands at the same conclusion where there's some kind. So consilience with silience, with that cohesion, resilience, that ability to come back to it. So then I was like, what is silience? Any of you go there with me? I don't know. I was like, I got to figure this out. So then I go in there, and I don't know whether this is official or not, but the wiki was there. So we'll go with that. And this just actually almost had me in tears. A kind of unnoticed excellence. A kind of unnoticed excellence that carries on around you every day. That beauty of just the implicate order of things. So resilience, the ability to find that place. Consilience, the place that be with it. And then, of course, we were talking about reconciliation, right? To reconstitute that, to redo that. And then it had me thinking about what we know about the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in South Africa and what was its power, going back to the hurt. It was not that there was retribution. It was, in fact, a process that created safety for people to tell their story. Victim and perp told their story. And Archbishop Desmond Tutu, who helped lead that, when he came to my community many years ago and talked about it, he said that the power of it recognized that the most important human need is to be heard. And that any partnership or collaboration or network that's worthy uses that power of being heard, not only as a place of healing for the individual, for the community, but as a place of strength where you can move on without retribution. It need not be an eye for an eye. That doesn't mean that it didn't happen. That doesn't mean that there's not time for punishment. It doesn't mean that there's not place for that, but that something can happen that goes to another level that is not just repetition of the same pattern. So that's my play with silience a little bit, consilience. So what do we know about partnership? Our table had a beautiful conversation about it in the last hour. And I wanted to share a story of something that I was part of about 30 years ago. It was a small program working with homeless substance abusers on the streets of Denver. Still there to this day. At the time we started, there were 4 people on the street who were trying to be sober together and get work, and basically using AA as support as a way to hold themselves together. And it started growing, and more people came because we were helping people stay sober and get to work, get day jobs, and men wanted in, and then the women's program started growing, and it was really quite something beautiful. And then the disabled American veterans across the street from our little storefront place on Larimer downtown said, we've got a 30,000 square foot building and we want to give it to you to sort of expand. You have ideas. And we went over there and was sort of like, wow, this is incredible. 3 stories, all this space, we're growing, this could be great. And then we had no money, and we had no technical skills, and no material to do anything with it. And so we sort of like, wow, and then we don't really have anything. And so sort of this magical day, and it was sort of beautiful and tragic, and we're having this conversation, and the men in the program were watching TV. And somebody said, in our little group that was talking about it, we don't even have a plumber, right? Blanking plumber. And one of the men stood up and said, I'm a master plumber. And somebody else said, I'm an electrician, and I have wired buildings, and I know how to do that. And somebody said, before I blew it and ended up down here, my family owns a lumber yard. And we rebuilt Step 13, which is now still 30 years later, downtown, one of the most powerful transitional living programs in Denver. That entire building was built with the skills of the men and women in the program who were viewed as being no asset. They were not only no asset, a net negative. And they had every single skill that was needed to move the community forward. It built their own sobriety. It built the program's proof point that that method of self-help and partnership and integrity in was actually a model that could not only help this organization have its impact, but others grow, but it created safety in the neighborhood and helped transform the neighborhood around it. Out of that simple place of seeing in these women and men the assets that they actually were and needed an expression for. So if that's what we're seeing in this, what does it mean to move to network? We've talked today about what I would call radical inclusion. Not just because diversity is right to include, but because we can't do this without the mosaic. And it's going to require us to start with respect. Not just the way that we typically think of that term, well, that's a great place to start, but with what respect really means, which is respect, to look again. How do I look again at another person and say, oh, whatever I thought I saw, I'm starting to see you now. How do we do that? A basis for this. To remember, which is what those women and men were doing, to remember, to bring themselves back together, an opportunity, like a network is, to reconstitute ourselves for the whole that we actually are. And of course, in that way, to be a resource. Just what's so beautiful about initiatives like IOBI, which I'm really enjoying right now, community sourcing, community resourcing, a way to have not just the grants and all that, but how does everybody sort of step up and bring their resource into this? So that when we start talking about collective impact and co-benefit, and we say, oh yeah, we do, we scale healthy regional food systems, it's great to access to healthy, affordable food, it helps build local farms, it helps strengthen the local economies. It can create, not much food does, but it can create living wage jobs. Yes, we can do more full-service grocery stores. We start to say, well, yeah, when we do that, or we create walkable, bikeable downtowns, yes, it's good for jobs. Yes, it's good for equity. Yes, it's good for health. Yes, it's good yes, it's good for our carbon footprint. And in doing those kinds of efforts, this kind of a collaboration isn't all about, well, be in it for the reason that we're in it, but why is it good for you? What about being in this for you really works? So that you're not just coming because I said you might come, or a favor, or because we like each other or something like that, but because we're in it, because there's something in it that we both want to bring and that matches what our mission is. We may have divergent goals, health, food, equity, economic development, but convergent strategies. A good friend of mine, Mick Cornett's the mayor of Oklahoma City, and he's a red state guy. He's a beautiful man. And I was teasing him the other day about all the walkable, bikeable stuff, and I was saying, Mick, you look like my old community of Boulder, all this kind of. And walkable, bikeable, is this like, and he said, I'm just trying to create jobs in Oklahoma City. And I know that if I don't create a walkable, bikeable, mixed-use development downtown, I can't create the community. And the bike groups and the equity, the others are all in, but they're in it for different reasons. And we need to be very careful about how we don't need to always bend people to our purpose, when in fact the strategies may align even if the visions and goals are different. So that may be helpful to us as we think about how we build a network that lasts. So I don't know what our time is or whether we need to wrap up. We're good. We have a couple minutes. But I bring this forward, that there's something about what the Greeks brought forward around civilization being the true, the good, and the beautiful, which I think is modeled in the kind of safety that we created to be vulnerable in who we are, to create environments that are allowing us to express ourselves fully, to recognize that we have all we need, like the men and women at Step 13 proved again, and many of the partnerships that we talked about demonstrate to us, that we may be in it for different reasons, but find strange bedfellows that are actually part of the equation if we're not so arrogant as to think that they need to think like us in order to be with us. And that if we want to create something that spreads, yeah, we may need a business case for well-being so that we can invest in it, and it may be hard for the CBO to score prevention, and we may need to do that. And yet, I think that those principles, those premises are the way for us as we say, yes, we want to spread well-being, the human level well-being in organizations that manifest that in and of themselves, and help our partnerships, our collaborations find each other in a way that we can do this in a way that reaches everyone, not just those that are fortunate. Picking on that IOM report this morning, because there's some that are going to live 5 years less, and there's others that are going to live 15 years more in the same breath. And so how do we make sure that that well-being is truly even? I know in our organization at Kaiser Permanente, I know for me what that's meaning is that this isn't just about community benefit anymore. That what we put into charity care and coverage and the grants, and they're significant. But if we don't line up our purchasing, how we use our real estate to revitalize downtown, how we use our payroll and our hiring from the community to represent the communities that we're serving, how we use our environmental stewardship and our buying of solar and wind to also do the same thing with the schools. If we're not functioning as that kind of an anchor institution and we're just making grants at the margin, we're not going to be showing up in the way that we're capable of all in to bring ourselves forward. And I guess my challenge to myself, to our organization, and to each of us is, what does all in mean to you? And what would a network look like that invites all in a way that means yes to well-being for everyone? We'll just let that be a beautiful little koan, like a pebble in the shoe that just you can't quite find. But it's there, and it keeps asking, what does it mean for me to be all in? What does it mean for us to move from this beautiful partnership with the ethos, the DNA that Samueli has so beautifully created, that actually invites the kind of all-in commitment that can allow this to spread and scale for the kind of impact that we seek. And hopefully, and you can tell me, Bonnie and Wayne, if that's the right question, but that hopefully that's an inquiry that going into tomorrow might help inform not only who we need to be, but what we need to ask of each other, so that we're clear on our intention, we become more clear about what we can each bring and what we each need from each other to make that happen. So, thank you for letting me have a few minutes with you.